Debugging is one of the key skills you are going to need as you deploy Run.js custom checks in your environment. In this session, we're going to show you how to debug and evaluate how your scripts are running as you deploy them within Avantra. Hey everyone, welcome back to Mastering Avantra. Today's topic, we're going to go through how to debug your Run.js custom checks and the tools and the techniques you can use to see exactly what's going on as you develop your custom checks. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm here in my Avantra master server, as I always am, and I will show you here that I have one single server configured where we're going to be doing our example checks today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first of all start off by creating a basic custom check, and then let's start debugging it and adding in some tools to see exactly what's going on. So I start with configuration and custom checks, and I'm going to create a new custom check of the type Run.js. So if I scroll down, I'll find Run.js here. I'm going to execute on the server side, and I'm going to call it MA_debugging. And I'll always copy that name for later. Okay, so now we hit create, and now we're in our custom check development environment. Now I always use the pin over here on the right hand side to give myself full screen, just so I can see everything that I'm working on. And we always start with the hygiene. Let's start by putting in a description, a simple example custom check for debugging. I'm going to go for real-time monitoring execution, executed once every 5 minutes. In terms of where I want this check to execute, I have a system selector, which is all of my production Red Hat servers, and that's what I'm going to use. Now, a couple of things here. Firstly, I always recommend doing your development on a single test server. So it's always useful to have one single server that you're testing on, just so you're not pushing out your test custom checks while you're developing them to hundreds, thousands of servers at the same time. So make sure you choose your sample server, your development server carefully for where to execute this custom check. All right, now I always start my custom checks with 2 lines. So they're constants, and it's cc name, and that's a string, and I put in the name of the custom check, and cc version is equal to 1.0. I'll come back to why I always do this later, and it really is down to in the future, if you're going back reviewing your logs, if you're going back reviewing how the scripts have been executing and you've logging switched on or debugging switched on, then you can see what version of the code is running and this kind of stuff. So I'll cover that in a little bit later on. So I'm going to make a very simple script, and I'm going to say check.message is equal to the script has executed. Just like that. Okay, so all I'm doing here is I've created a very simple custom check, and if I hit apply and activate and I send it to my agent, then this script is going to execute on the server I showed you earlier. And all the check is going to do, it's very simple, is it's going to output the text, the script has executed. So if I go to server and I go into my server and into checks, I'm going to do a quick search for MA_, because that's the name I used, and we can see this is successfully executed. It's all green, and we see the script has executed. Now, the first function I'm going to tell you about when it comes to debugging is the print function. And just like this, I'm about to, let's just put about to set the output message. Like that. And then I'm going to put one just after this, just successfully set the output message. Okay, so what I've done here is I have put a debug statement here that says about to set the output message. Then we set the output message, and then afterwards I say I've just successfully set the output message. Not very interesting, but you know, it's quite a simple example where we are adding statements that tell us exactly what's about to happen and what has just happened around some pretty important commands. If I come over here and I hit refresh, it takes a couple of seconds. It could be instantly, it could be 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, depending on your network topology, for the Avantra master server to send your code to the agent to be executed. But eventually, if you keep refreshing, it'll come up. And we see the script is executed, about to set the output message, just successfully set the output message. Something's not right here, or something feels off. Because if I look at the order in which I have them here, really speaking, the output should be about to set the output message. The script has executed, just successfully set the output message. So why is it not in that order here? And it's very simple. The order of priority in terms of outputs to this console is as follows. Your check message is first and will always be first. That's why it's the first line. The script has executed. Then it will output any tables you have tried to construct. So these are literally formatted tables. For example, if I go back to this server here and go into checks, you'll see I have other ones here. So my OpenSSL version checker. So for example, we have a table here, and this is the check.message. Check.message is always first. The table is second. The third output item is always the debug statements from the print command. And that's why we see our print commands coming out last. So just an important one for you to remember. You shouldn't therefore use the print command to try and print things in order with the check.message. It's just not going to work that way. The print stuff always comes at the very bottom, and it's always displayed in the order in which it was executed. Very powerful stuff. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you is, okay, let's say we've written a 100-line amazing custom check. And we've loads of print statements in there because we've been building it up, and it's working and it's great. What do you do then? Do you leave them in there? And that's a lot of extra data to sit there in a production check every single time. It's not really good hygiene to leave it there. Do you go back and you remove all the print statements? Okay, that's a lot of work. And what if you need to put them back in later? That's even more work. So there's a little trick I use to allow myself to switch on and off these print statements very easily. So let's do that now. So I'm going to set, first of all, this variable here called debugging. I'm going to set it to 0 to start with, because in the majority of cases you might have multiple levels of debugging. So for example, 0 equals off, 1 equals info, 2 equals debug, or whatever, something like that. And you could have error levels and all this kind of stuff. So in this case, I'm just going to have 0 and 1. So off and on, that's pretty much it. Now, that in itself does nothing. The print statement will still continue to function as it always does. So what I do next is I create a function. And what I'm doing here is I'm wrapping the print function in my own logging function. So I'm going to say debug log, and it's going to take an argument called message. And if debugging is greater than 0, let's say, then we do print message. So it's very simple. All I've done here is, instead of calling the print command here, I'm now going to call debug log. And debug log will only output to the console if we have debugging enabled. So let's apply and send this to agent. Now, currently debugging is set to 0. There is no logging. So therefore this output that we saw earlier should be cleaned up, and we should just see the script has executed. But all those print statements are still in there, which is really, really nice. And there we go. So the script has executed. Now if I come back and switch this to 1, like this, and we go back and we refresh, we'll give it a couple of seconds to send the data across the network, etc., etc. But if we give it a couple of seconds, we should see that our logging is re-enabled. And suddenly we're seeing all that information with just the flip of one bit in this case, or number in this case. So there we go. Now that in itself is still a little bit inelegant, because you have to come in and adjust the custom check in order to actually get it to enable the debugging. So there's another technique I like to use here, which is using monitoring parameters. So if I pop into administration and into settings, and you have to have the right permissions to do this, there's a section here called custom monitoring parameters. Now I've created one earlier here, but I'm going to delete that for the sake of it's still in use somewhere else. It doesn't matter. We'll use it here. So I'm going to create a new monitoring parameter. Now, monitoring parameters can be assigned to your object, your servers, your SAP systems, your databases, your clouds, whatever the case may be. And then these can be set as configuration, and you can read these in your script. Hopefully you see where I'm going here. So if we have a custom monitoring parameter called cust.ma debugging, like this. And I'm going to set that on the servers, and it's going to be a number like this. Then I can set the default value, and this indicates whether debugging statements should be switched on. 0 equals off, 1 equals on. I could use a Boolean as well if I so choose, but I'm just using numbers here for the sake of clarity. So there we go. So we have cust ma debugging. Now by default, that is switched to 0. So let's go ahead and add that to our script, and then I'll show you how to change it. So here where I'm saying var debugging is equal to 1, I'm going to change this. I'm going to now reach out to the custom monitoring parameters that I just created, and I'm going to use this to determine whether I'm actually going to log or not. So how do I get at the custom monitoring parameters? It's quite easy. There's a object called monitored system. Oops, capital S. Monitored system. And it has a function called get moni param. Get monitoring parameters. And then we put the name of our monitoring parameter. So monitored system dot get moni param, capital M, capital P, and then you put in the name of the custom monitoring parameter we just created over here. Now the default value system-wide is 0, so assuming all of this is working, the logging should switch off. It should start in a switched off state. So I've now sent this to the agent. That's what that green box over there meant. If I go back to server, we should see our debug statements here disappear after execution. So let's give it a couple of seconds to figure this out. And once it's done that, then we will see that it has picked up on this configuration and it has stopped outputting to the console. Now, I set a default value. You may want to then say, okay, but what if I want to enable debugging only on my development systems rather than the production systems? How do I do that? Very simply, parameter sets. So if you go into configuration and into parameter sets, I'm going to create a new parameter set, and I'm going to call it MA debugging enabled. And we're going to have it on servers. And this PS enables debugging statements within run.js custom checks. Okay, I'm going to apply it to all of my production rel servers like this. I can also switch service hours, have it on a schedule. It's really, really powerful stuff. And then finally, I'm going to add in that monitoring parameter. So I'm going to say new, so cust dot, what was it called? Let's have a look. MA debugging, there it is, cust.madebugging. And the default value here was set to 0, but I'm going to change it to 1. And I hit apply and activate. Now, the Avantra master server will send this to the agent when the agent checks in next, typically within 5 minutes. So I'm going to force this and just make it a little bit faster for the sake of this demo. And I'm going to go back to the server and say send to agent. So this updates the agent in the server with the latest configuration. Bearing in mind, we've now just updated the configuration of the agent. We're not updating the code of the custom check anymore. It's just the configuration. And that's the fantastic part about this. So let's go into our checks, into MA debugging. It executed 13 seconds ago. And look at that. Our debugging is now enabled. So there we go. So that's a few really powerful techniques that you can use in order to add debugging to your existing custom check, but also then to have that configurable and switchable on and off as required. The final thing I'll show you here relates to these two hygiene items I always put at the very top. Custom check name and custom check version. Now, it may not seem obvious why I really put that in on every single check, because hey, the name is also defined up here. You know, there is no versioning per se, although I personally keep all of my scripts in a Git repository separate to Avantra. So why are they there? It's because of this, the debug log function. I usually go a step further, and I'm not going to go through all of this now. I'll just show you what the output looks like. And if you're familiar with JavaScript, this is not going to be difficult for you. So I like my outputs to be date, time, cc name, cc version, message. So let's take this one as an example, right? So that's the message. It would say something along the lines of 2021 0507 at 11:57:59, let's say. It would say MA debugging, something like that, 1.0, and then it would output the message, this one here, like that. That's the sort of debugging line I prefer to see. And by centralizing your debug function and how you output these debug messages, you can very easily, say, I know what date and time it is, I'm going to output that. I know what the custom check name and version is, I'm going to output that. And then I know what the message is, I can output that. So that is something I would highly recommend if you're going to be doing a lot of this. Hey, build this in. It's a very useful addition to your logging. It also shows you the execution times and where you might have long running statements and that kind of fun stuff. The final thing I would show here is where you have the print. I would always add this statement here, json.stringify. Now, if that is a string, so if the message variable is already a string, it does nothing. It's just a string. However, if you pass through a complex object, like an array or a JSON object or whatever the case may be, rather than outputting something that looks like that, which we've all seen, it will turn that object into a string so you can actually see it in the debug log. And that's a very, very useful thing to have. What it does do is it adds a quotes around the string. So that's another way of just showing exactly what the message is and the fact that it's a debug statement. But other than that, it's a very useful technique for making sure that you're able to output complex objects like arrays and whatnot. Right, so there we go. So that's it. So that's some of the techniques and skills you're going to need to debug your Run.js custom checks as you go through the deployment of Run.js in your environment. I hope this has been useful. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned on Mastering Avantra on our YouTube channel to see more.